The winter of 1945 hung heavy over the war-torn skies of Europe. Germany's once mighty Luftwaffe was now a shadow of its former self. Allied bombers ruled the air, and every mission over German territory came with near-certain death for the few remaining German pilots still loyal to the crumbling Reich. Yet, hidden deep inside the collapsing Nazi war machine was a weapon so advanced it looked like something from the future. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. This wasn't just another aircraft. It was a technological leap decades ahead of its time. Powered by twin-jet engines, the Me 262 could fly at speeds no Allied plane could match, over 540 miles per hour, compared to the 400 mph top speeds of most Allied fighters. In the right hands, it could have changed the balance of power in the skies. But by 1945, it was too late. The Reich was falling apart. Fuel was scarce. Factories were bombed. Pilots were exhausted. Among those pilots was a 23-year-old named Heinrich Schäfer, name historically inspired. He had spent years fighting the Allies, watching his friends fall one by one. But he was no fanatic. He was a soldier caught in a war that had long stopped making sense. On March 31st, 1945, while flying his Me 262 on a test mission from Munich, Schäfer's radar and navigation systems began to fail. He was low on fuel, the sky thick with Allied patrols, and the nearest German airfield was under attack. Desperate and disoriented, he spotted what looked like an abandoned runway below. He circled once, then descended through the mist, landing roughly on what he thought was German soil. But it wasn't. Schäfer had just landed his state-of-the-art German jet on an American-controlled airfield in Germany. When the American soldiers first saw the sleek silver machine skid to a halt, they froze. This was like nothing they had ever seen. It looked alien. No propellers, no visible exhaust stacks, and a shark-like fuselage. Soldiers aimed their rifles as the cockpit opened, and a terrified young German pilot raised his hands. Within minutes, the Americans realized they had captured something priceless. The most advanced aircraft in the world. The Me 262 represented everything the Allies feared and admired about German engineering. Brilliant, daring, and dangerous. Word spread quickly. Intelligence officers rushed to the airfield. Engineers, mechanics, and generals all gathered around the strange machine. One officer reportedly said, "This could change everything." As Schäfer was taken into custody, he probably didn't realize it yet, but his mistaken landing had just handed the Allies a technological gift beyond their wildest imagination. The captured Me 262 would soon be flown, tested, and dissected by American scientists. Its secrets unlocking a new era of jet warfare. It would not only shape the final months of World War II, but also rewrite the future of aviation forever. When Heinrich Schäfer's Me 262 came to rest on that captured German airfield, the Americans knew immediately they had something extraordinary. The war in Europe was nearing its brutal conclusion, but this was no ordinary capture. The machine was sleek, silent, and deadly-looking. Its twin turbojet engines were unlike anything Allied engineers had ever worked with. Within hours, the jet was transported under armed guard to a secure facility. The Americans wanted answers. How had Germany built something so advanced? And how could they use it? The aircraft was sent to Wright Field in Ohio, a top-secret U.S. Army Air Force testing center. What followed was one of the most intense periods of reverse engineering in military history. When the plane arrived, engineers from Lockheed, Boeing, and Bell Aircraft crowded around it like archaeologists studying a relic from the future. The first thing that stunned them was the design philosophy. The Me 262 wasn't just fast. It was brilliantly efficient. Every curve and angle served a purpose. Its swept-back wings hinted at aerodynamic principles that the Americans hadn't yet mastered. The cockpit layout, the use of lightweight alloys, even the gun placement. Everything about it screamed innovation. But there was one major problem. The engines, Jumo 004 turbojets, were incredibly advanced, but also incredibly fragile. Built with scarce wartime materials, they barely lasted 25 hours before burning out. German engineers had been forced to improvise with substitutes for critical alloys, like nickel and chromium. The Americans realized that if they could rebuild the Me-262 using their own resources and precision manufacturing, they could create something that would dominate the skies for decades. American test pilot Colonel Harold "Hal" Watson, part of the Watson's Wizards team tasked with capturing and testing enemy aircraft, took on the challenge. He carefully studied the Me-262's systems, instruments, and controls. When he climbed into the cockpit for the first American test flight, the entire base held its breath. The engines screamed to life with an otherworldly howl, a sound few in America had ever heard before. The jet accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, until it lifted into the air with a grace no propeller-driven plane could match. "It's like riding a thunderbolt," Watson reportedly said after landing. From that moment on, the U.S. Air Force realized the future of aerial combat had changed forever. Propellers were finished. Speed was the new weapon. Over the next months, American engineers meticulously dismantled the Me-262, measuring every part, sketching every curve, and studying its performance. Their findings directly influenced the creation of America's first operational jet fighter, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, a machine that would soon define the new era of air superiority. But it wasn't just about technology. The capture of the Me-262 also revealed the desperation and brilliance of the Nazi war effort in its final days. Hitler himself had delayed the jet's production, demanding it be converted into a Blitz bomber rather than a pure fighter, a decision that cost Germany precious time. If the Me-262 had been unleashed a year earlier in large numbers, it might have slowed the Allied advance dramatically. By the time America fully understood the jet's potential, Germany was collapsing. Cities were in ruins, the Eastern Front was gone, and Allied forces were marching toward Berlin. Still, the knowledge gained from Schaefer's accidental landing was priceless. That one mistake had given the Allies a window into the future, one that would define not only the Cold War, but also the dawn of supersonic flight, missile technology, and the race to the edge of space. The Me-262 wasn't just a captured plane. It was the blueprint for the next 50 years of aviation. When the Americans began dissecting the Me-262's secrets, they weren't just learning. They were evolving. The captured jet had opened a door that could never be closed. At Wright Field, under the cloak of secrecy, teams of engineers worked night and day. Jet propulsion was no longer a rumor whispered among scientists. It was real, tangible, and now American. Inside locked hangars, engineers studied the Jumo 004 engine with surgical precision. They discovered that its turbine blades, though crude in quality, were far ahead of their time in design. The Germans had pushed physics to its limit, achieving speeds and thrust levels no other nation had come close to. The Americans realized that if they combined German engineering with American materials and manufacturing techniques, they could build something unstoppable. Meanwhile, far from Ohio, the war in Europe was drawing to its catastrophic end. Allied troops were closing in on Berlin, and chaos consumed the Nazi hierarchy. But deep inside the collapsing Reich, General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top fighter aces, reflected bitterly. He had pleaded with Hitler to unleash the Me-262 earlier, as a pure interceptor, not a bomber. But Hitler, obsessed with revenge, refused. "This aircraft is a bomber, not a fighter," the Führer had declared. That single order crippled Germany's air defenses and cost thousands of pilots their lives. When Galland learned that one of the Me-262s had accidentally fallen into American hands, his heart sank. "Now," he told his aides, They will learn faster than we did. He was right. In the months that followed, Operation Lusty, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology, began. The U.S. military launched an all-out mission to seize every advanced German aircraft, scientist, and document before the Soviets could. The Me-262 was the crown jewel. American intelligence agents combed through abandoned airfields, factories, and even bomb craters, looking for pieces of the jet. Entire aircraft were dismantled and shipped across the Atlantic. Among the most valuable finds was a set of detailed aerodynamic test data from Peenemünde, the same facility that produced the V-2 Turtwan Towan Leidertrait. These files would become instrumental not only for future aircraft, but also for the dawn of the space age. Back in America, Lockheed's visionary engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson, the man who would later design the SR-71 Blackbird, studied the Me-262's shape carefully. He noted how its swept wings reduced drag at high speeds, a feature that would later define the world's fastest jets. The P-80 and later the F-86 Sabre borrowed heavily from this design language. The Me-262 had effectively planted the seed for the jet-powered Cold War era. But for Heinrich Schaefer, the German pilot who had accidentally handed his nation's most prized weapon to the enemy, life had become a silent burden. Captured by Allied troops, he was interrogated but treated fairly. They wanted his expertise, not revenge. He told them everything: how the jet handled, how the engines performed, and what limitations they faced. Years later, Schaefer would live quietly in post-war Germany, his name largely forgotten by history. But those who knew him said he carried a strange melancholy. In one rare interview in the 1960s, he said softly, "I wanted to fly for my country, not give its secrets away, but fate had other plans." Meanwhile, across the ocean, America's skies filled with the roar of jet engines. By 1947, the Bell X-1, piloted by Chuck Yeager, broke the sound barrier. The direct descendant of the jet revolution the Me-262 had inspired. What began as a Nazi superweapon had become the foundation of America's aerospace dominance. It was poetic in a way. The weapon meant to save the Third Reich, instead helped build the modern U.S. Air Force. By the 1950s, Me-262s were museum pieces, relics of a terrifying but brilliant chapter in human invention. And yet, whenever pilots walked past them, they couldn't help but stare in awe. Because that machine wasn't just metal and rivets. It was a glimpse of a future born too soon. A future that belonged to whoever understood it first. And America did. By the time Allied troops entered Berlin in May 1945, the world had already changed, even if most people didn't realize it yet. The streets were filled with rubble, the air reeked of smoke and surrender, and the once mighty Luftwaffe was gone. But in a few secret hangars, hidden behind Allied lines, engineers worked quietly around a captured machine that seemed to belong to another age. The Messerschmitt Me 262. The jet looked like something out of a science fiction dream. Sleek, predatory, and frighteningly fast. For the Americans and British who examined it, the message was unmistakable. The next war would be fought at the speed of sound. As reports reached Washington, the reaction was electric. The Me-262 was not just an aircraft, it was a warning. It had proved that jet propulsion could rewrite the rules of air combat forever. And though Germany had lost, its invention had revealed what the future of warfare looked like. At Wright Field, Ohio, captured Me-262s were rebuilt piece by piece. American test pilots flew them in controlled conditions, recording data that would later shape every jet fighter to come. "It's like strapping yourself to a thunderbolt," one pilot wrote. "Once it starts rolling, there's no sound, just power." But the story didn't end there. What began as a study project quickly became a technological arms race between the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Each nation realized that whoever mastered jet power would control the skies for decades to come. After Germany's collapse, American intelligence agencies launched Operation Paperclip, a secret program designed to capture the Reich's top scientists and engineers before the Soviets could. Among them were experts in aerodynamics, propulsion, and rocketry, the very people who had worked on the Me-262 and the V-2 rocket. Many of these scientists were quietly relocated to America. They began working under new names at bases like White Sands and Edwards Air Force Base. Their knowledge became the foundation for the U.S. Air Force jet program, and later, NASA's space missions. One of the most astonishing transfers came from data taken directly from the Me-262's wind tunnel tests, aerodynamic breakthroughs that allowed American engineers to perfect the swept-wing design seen in the F-86 Sabre, and later, the F-100 Super Sabre. These aircraft would dominate the skies of the Korean War, outmaneuvering Soviet-built MiGs, proof that the legacy of a captured German jet had turned into America's most powerful advantage. Meanwhile, far from the headlines, Heinrich Schaefer, the pilot whose misfortune had given the Allies the Me-262 intact, lived in obscurity. In post-war Germany, people whispered that he had given away the Reich's future. But those who understood aviation history knew better. Schaefer hadn't betrayed anyone. He had changed the course of history. In the 1950s, when he saw the first jetliners streaking across Europe's skies, witnesses say Schaefer stood silently on a hillside, watching. "That's what we dreamed of," he murmured. "But we were building it for the wrong reasons." The Me-262 didn't just give birth to new warplanes. It redefined how nations thought about power. From that moment on, the balance of global strength shifted from tanks and trenches to speed, altitude, and technology. Every fighter that followed, the F-86, the MiG-15, the F-4 Phantom, and even the F-22 Raptor, carries echoes of that German jet's DNA. The Me-262 was more than a machine. It was a symbol of how far humanity could go, and how easily that brilliance could be turned toward destruction. Historians still call it one of Hitler's greatest strategic blunders. He insisted that the Me-262 should be used as a bomber instead of a fighter, delaying its deployment until it was too late to change the war's outcome. Had he listened to his engineers and aces, the skies over Europe might have looked very different. But that arrogance became history's twist of fate. By misusing his greatest weapon, Hitler accidentally handed the Allies the future. By 1947, only 2 years after the war ended, American test pilot Chuck Yeager shattered the sound barrier in the Bell X-1, a plane that directly benefited from data first discovered in the Me-262. From there, the jet age accelerated beyond imagination. From supersonic bombers to passenger jets, from Cold War dogfights to space exploration. The Me-262 had been born in war, but its spirit lived on in peace. Today, only a handful of those jets remain. Silent relics sitting in museums. But every time a modern jet roars into the sky, it carries a ghostly echo from 1945. The sound of that first jet taking off. The sound of history changing course. Heinrich Schaefer never received medals nor recognition. But his mistake, the one that handed the Me-262 to the enemy, helped shape the modern world. It was proof that sometimes history's biggest revolutions begin with an accident. The jet that was meant to save the Reich ended up transforming humanity's path to the future. And as long as aircraft scream through the stratosphere, that legacy, born from one captured jet, will never fade.